This is the Edge of Excellence, empowering people to shape the future. Let's inspire, innovate, and explore together. Welcome to Edge of Excellence, the podcast where we explore how leadership, culture, and technology can empower businesses to grow and thrive. I am your co-host, Jess DeForge, and today we are going to be talking about the new leadership challenge, which is guiding teams in a remote world. With remote and hybrid models here to stay, leaders are still navigating how to build strong cultures, foster collaboration, and keep teams truly connected no matter where they're working from. In this episode, we are going to talk about what it takes to make that happen. Bryon, why don't you tell us who's joining us today?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And this whole topic is so near and dear to my heart. It's all about culture. And it makes me smile just even having somebody that embraces this and lives every day. This is Matt Freake, who is Vice President of Client Services at iuvo. While he's incredibly technical, especially when it comes to building secure, user-friendly cloud infrastructures, what really sets Matt apart is his passion for the people behind the technology. Now, iuvo is known for their amazing culture that empowers people to achieve greatness, and it follows the philosophy in the book Leadership at the Edge. But at the forefront of all this culture is Matt. At iuvo, he leads with our core values front and center, always looking for ways to make the business not only run better, but feel better for our clients and our team. So Matt's here to talk about how culture, leadership, and intentional connections shape the future of remote work. Matt, big welcome to you. Welcome to the Edge of Excellence.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Good. Matt, and actually this, Bryon, can also go to you because you are a leader at iuvo as well. But to both of you, I would love to know, what does culture mean to you in a remote and hybrid environment?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in initially. I mean, I think at the end of the day, culture needs to span any work environment. So if you're in person, remote, hybrid, it doesn't it shouldn't have an impact on culture. Just the how you foster and grow it is what changes. So I really don't think that you should change your culture based on how the company is working. I think uh, one area where it becomes a little bit of a test of your culture, and particularly around trust. I think because I think people inherently are less trusting of not being able to see the people that they're managing and the work that's happening in front of them in the way that you historically have been in an office. And so I feel like that's one common challenge to overcome for folks is just getting comfortable with, like, do I really trust my staff to do their job? And making sure that they feel that from management and leadership.
So Matt, you've been here with us for quite a while, right? And so when you first started with us, we had an office and we had some remote work and whenever necessary, and we literally transformed or to a hybrid environment or mostly a remote environment. Can you say do you think that the culture made that more successful or less successful, or how do you think how culture had an impact on that?
And coming to iuvo about now almost 12 years ago, it was definitely a transition in terms of um, getting used to not being in the same building with everybody they're working with every day. And I think one immediate thing that I noticed with working at iuvo was just that there was a lot of communication at the time. This was in, I think, Skype chat, which dates all of us a little bit. But there was a lot of support and proactive collaboration amongst the team, which I think is really healthy in any culture. And so I was coming into this new company. I was going to client sites by myself, doing consulting work, which is what we primarily do. And it was uh, it was nice to be able to go out on my own and work independently, but also just sort of have albeit a smaller team to back me up at the time. But, there's a lot of very smart people that I worked with. So if I needed anything, I knew I could rely on them. And I think that um, really helped me build relationships with other people, but also just, adapt to that different working environment. Um, I think also just in the nature of consulting, you sort of end up um, interacting with a lot of different cultures at clients. And so I think all of our best client relationships also have sort of similar cultural elements, at least. And so it was nice to sort of see where that really jived well. And, um, those were always the most successful clients as well, which is always interesting.
Now, you both know I did not start out in marketing or tech. I've made a career shift. And the career that I was in was education. And we had a camaraderie, with my fellow coworkers. And so while overall culture may not have been great, the camaraderie, the connection that I felt to my colleagues was so strong. And it was one of the things that made me a little hesitant and nervous about making a jump to a new career, especially one that involved remote work. While there was a lot of benefits that I saw to it, that one piece about culture and connection was a concern for me because I couldn't quite understand like how you could have both in a remote environment. And so to my surprise, it does exist. And I have found it here at iuvo. And I never had the luxury of getting to have the in-person work with my iuvo colleagues. It's been remote since I joined the team. And yet I feel extremely connected and supported. And that is a real gift and a testament to the work that you all are doing here. And so I'd love to hear from you, Matt, on how do you build and maintain a culture in a completely remote environment, especially when you have someone like myself who came in strictly remote and I didn't have that, prior engagement with colleagues to kind of lean into?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like a strong culture is about relationships. And so, it's, uh, it's definitely a little bit more work, I think, to build relationships when you're not in the same physical space as people. But I think it's still entirely possible, and obviously you can be successful at it. Like I think somebody that I work with quite a bit on the team is located in North Carolina, and we've been able to build a good relationship with each other, hundreds, I don't know how many miles away North Carolina is, but an airplane flight away. uh, and so, I've had conversations with him about this too, where he had similar sentiments that, he wasn't sure what it would be like coming into a new company, being in a whole other state. Jess is still here in Massachusetts, but the other end of it. And, it's been good to sort of prove it out that it's doable. I think there are a lot of different elements to it. There's obviously just the day-to-day collaboration, which I think has always been a core facet of iuvo, but there's also the sort of more fun things, like we get everybody together at least once a year in the same place for a holiday / anniversary party, and at the end of or beginning of the year, which is always really great to see people and their partners and families. Uh, and then additionally, there's a lot of good virtual events that we do, which really kind of took off more at the beginning of COVID, and just figuring out what we could do to stay connected during a time when people weren't able to leave the house, let alone maybe meet up in person. So I think it's ultimately just you have to choose a blend of different things. You have to get people together physically still, and make sure to prioritize that. Make sure that it's inclusive of the people that might be even further away and not as easily able to get meet up for a coffee in the local cafe, and just make sure that there's a lot of cross communication and really feedback of what's working well and what's not working well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that iuvo is really good about being mindful. And you said, you really have, it is a bit more work to be mindful about it and to think about ways to make sure that everyone feels connected. Um, just some of the Slack channels that have been created at iuvo alone, I think help with that. Because we have channels just based on people's interests and things. And we make sure to celebrate the personal milestones of each iuvo that we have. And I think that's just something really cool that we do here to kind of help develop that culture. Do you see, maybe in other companies or maybe just talking with friends that you have that work at other companies, mistakes that leaders may make when they're trying to replicate office culture virtually?
Yeah, I think it kind of the biggest mistake I think goes back to trust. Like if you can't trust people to do their job, then you're inherently just going to be worrying about what they're doing all the time. You're going to implement unnecessary systems to monitor people, which nobody likes to monitor those systems or be monitored by those systems. And I think a really important reframe of that whole thing is looking at outcomes, right? Like giving people the trust that their job is really clearly defined and saying like this is what it should look like if you're successful, and then measuring them on that as opposed to like how many hours they've spent moving a mouse to keep their teams active, like. And I think where people really struggle in a remote environment is often when they can't trust their team. And I think either that's just an unfounded fear, or you have a team that has an issue with trust already, for other reasons. Like maybe you just have staff that aren't in the right role or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think it's really about trust and having the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, Matt, I think you hit it on the head. I was thinking about when Jess said that about there. I think people tried sometimes to replicate exactly the office experience. So like might be say like when you get in, you have to be on Zoom or Teams all the time, right? Because it goes down to trust because they don't trust that they're there or they're moving the mouse and so forth. I think that when you talked about you have maybe having people to understand their jobs. I think if you do it well, I think if you want to, the mistakes people make are maybe the jobs or even what they need to get done is not very clearly laid out. So and they rely on the inter office, like, oh, by the way, I didn't tell you what these reports are due tomorrow, like whatever, could you walk by? So now you have to purposely say, we want to achieve this. Here's how we're going to measure it. And I think if a business adapts as well, I think they can it's powerful. It makes our business better. But those who don't adapt, like, hey, I used to just give you a deadline and right before lunch, and then you would just do it, right? So, or whatever, something like that. So, yeah, I'm sure there's lots of crazy stories out there during this all happened. But
Yeah, you just reminded with that like 8:30 kind of Zoom meeting. A friend of mine who moved to the West Coast from the Boston area, she was working at a company that was located in Boston. They agreed to have her, keep working there in the West Coast, but they were really adamant that she kept East Coast hours, which you know, means a very early start to the day, and that included like 8:15 in the morning East Coast time stand up every day. So it was like a 5-minute meeting that she had to show up to, which just ultimately led her to finding a different job because that's uh, is California 3 hours different?
yeah,
Yeah, so she was getting up at 5:15 in the morning every day to do the stand up, and then her quality of life was so impacted by that. Like, of course her work is also going to be impacted by that. And that I think sometimes people put in these systems out of fear or out of a lack of trust, and they end up having the opposite effect that they want. They're like, oh, I need to hold people accountable to their work, so I need to make sure that they're physically in front of a camera at a certain time every day, when realistically maybe that person does their best work from you know 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. or something, and having and again, if you're looking at outcomes, if that's when they get their best work done and they're meeting all of their deliverables they need, like you should at least consider that and like have that conversation and be flexible with people because it's one of those areas where if you give people you empower them to kind of figure out how they work best and how they can produce the best outcomes, then you're going to benefit as the employer ultimately, and the people are going to be much happier.
Yeah, so I was going to ask a question about how to avoid micromanagement, but I'm hearing some common themes in some of your responses of, open communication and making sure to set very clear expectations and measuring outcomes over minutes and time and things like that. I think that for some people, that's a big adjustment. So, do you have any advice or suggestions on how you get there? Like, how do you build that trust and transparency when you want to have a healthy culture and you want your employees to feel empowered? Um, and maybe that's feeling tricky. Like, is there a way to start? Are there questions to ask yourself or your employees? Or,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about sort of living and breathing it holistically as a company. So I think where you can really run into problems is if people are giving their staff different expectations. So like it should be such that if you report to me or you report to Bryon, the expectation should be relatively similar, um and so I think you just the best way for it to be successful is to have overall alignment, starting with the senior leadership and leadership teams and managers, and making sure that the expectations are clearly set with them, everybody's on the same page, and then if this is a shift, right, as opposed to just more of a reset, like if you're moving to being all remote or whatever the scenario is, I think, and then once you have that leadership team aligned, then making sure you communicate it well to the staff so that that way, if there are areas where somebody's like, oh, I'm being like really micromanaged, but my CEO said that I shouldn't be, like, what do I do about that? There should be like clear ways that staff can like communicate that that's happening so that it can be addressed either individually with that manager or whatever the scenario may be. But um again, people need to feel and I guess that sort of leads to another really core thing, I think, to any healthy culture is like people need to feel comfortable giving feedback, and not and sort of cross functionally to kind of anybody in the company. um and so when they aren't able to give feedback, then you end up with those situations where somebody be might be being micromanaged, and they're on a little bit of an island because they don't want to go around their manager and raise it as an issue, and they don't know what to do about it. um and I think that's another place where just having a healthy culture is very beneficial, because maybe you don't know what to do about it, but you have a really good relationship with two or three other coworkers, and so you ask them what they think you should do, and so you have that sort of peer feedback where they might encourage you to then take it to somebody else, and it sort of is makes it a little bit more self-correcting, I think, to avoid those kind of pitfalls where you might have somebody being micromanaged.
We culture, culture was in my mind, 18 years ago when we started the company. We had remnants of that, and Jeff and I really believe that the culture was a key on this thing, but we were not we weren't perfect along the way. Was we had these things going on, and I will say that somewhere, I don't know how long it was ago, but we decided to write down and codify our core values. Right, what do we believe in? What is the core that we could use? And that really helped get everybody aligned, because you live and breathe those, and it can be really apparent whether people are either need some guidance towards the core values, or in some cases they don't fit, but for the most part, people want to know what to expect. And some people put their core values on their website, and that's all they ever did with it, and we really try to live and breathe those. So our culture I think I've always been proud of it, but it wasn't always perfect. And I think the more we define it, the more we reinforce it. And I think one of the points you made, Matt, which I really love is to be able to speak up. And we even, as a CEO, I always tell people, you could talk to me anytime, but new employees come in, they might say, oh, I don't know, I can't talk to Bryon. And so, but we have some people who are advocates, like, hey, if you're just shy and you want to speak your mind, I'll be your voice, right, until you feel comfortable. We've had stuff like the advocate programs and so forth. So yeah, that trust and everything you're talking about, that is totally on. And I do think, it's boils down to a shared set of values.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, I guess approaching this conversation, I was thinking so much about this like micromanagement aspect and trusting your employees. And Matt, you brought up a point that made me think that it really goes both ways because the employees need to have trust as well, because there needs to be open communication in order for this to really work, which means employees need to trust that they are safe to communicate if things are not working well or they're not feeling connected, which is just an interesting shift in my own thinking and approaching this conversation. And I think is important to know in how to be successful in doing this. And Bryon, I'm glad that you brought up the open door policy. And while we are a smaller company, it is intimidating, as a newcomer to think like, okay, the CEO is saying this is an open door policy. And yet, when it's true, when you mean what you say and it truly is an open door policy, it is just so rewarding from the employee standpoint to feel like you have access to people. And while there's respect to some level of like a hierarchy of like who you're reporting to, it just creates this overall sense of belonging. And from my standpoint, empowers the employees to not feel like you're like some bottom level tiered person. And like, if you have ideas or thoughts, you can contribute them freely. And so I think it's just a really good model to have if you're able to, with the size of your company, to feel like there's just open communication on all levels, for everyone to feel like they're connected in that way.
Yeah, I think a big, an important piece of that being successful is one of our core values, which is humility. And I think it ties back to, not having a huge ego. And really, I think when people are most toxic in a work environment, it's usually ego driven. And and it might be for a million different reasons. It might be out of fear for their job. It might be out of fear that they're not, doing a good job, and it's coming out in different ways. Like I think most political drama that I've seen in organizations is it's usually less about the actual work that's happening. It's usually more tied back to something personal going on with that human being that's involved. But I do think we've talked over the years about whether or not we needed humility as one of our core values, because it feels like such table stakes for us, but it really isn't, in a lot of organizations, because people want to own things and have a lot of control and power. And you see there's about a million examples of people's egos just getting so in their own way. So I do think that that's an important piece of the culture too.
It's interesting because we added humility a little bit later on. We really realized we needed that. And it's interesting because we have the smartest and most capable people I've ever worked with in my entire life. And you, Matt and Jess, are both examples of people who are super humble in what they're doing. And so some of the people that are in a company, you just talk to them and then they blow you away with their ideas, but yet they're so humble. And they're like, and they can, in that moment, the very senior person can ask a more junior person to help them with something they don't understand. Because I think a true collaborative culture really is about knowing knowing you don't know it all, and you get something from somebody. So uh it's uh it's good. It's, although sometimes like stand up for yourself. You're amazing. You're toot your horn occasionally because you're really amazing. So it's never
Yeah.
generally a problem because it's the opposite when somebody says, I take credit for everything in this company. And you're like, no, well, how did you do that? So
Yeah.
I think our kudos system on Slack helps with some of that for people who are shy to toot their own horn, where teammates and colleagues get to call out some really amazing things that people are doing that align to our core values, which I think is another facet that iuvo has implemented that has helped develop the culture and helped people not only feel connected, but give an opportunity to know that like we are constantly looking for ways to build each other up and recognize each other, which is really cool. And so we've talked a lot about collaboration and how important that is to have a successful culture when you're working remotely. But what do you think some of the best practices are for making remote collaboration work?
I mean, I guess if we're taking a step away from the things we've already talked about that I think are very important, but like feedback and like trust, I think are two huge ones. And even to Bryan's point of people asking, like a more senior person asking somebody about something they don't know. I mean, I think that's also super key to just growing the team as a whole, and plays into this and helps build that spider web of connections between people. But I think the other piece that may be obvious, but it is still relevant and important, is having like tools that work to make it easy to talk to people. I often tell people I love calling them when their little Teams icon is green. If I have a question or something, I, my generation maybe hates phone calls, but I will cold video call people just for fun, and like not to keep them on their toes at all, but just because it's sometimes nice to just chat with somebody
It's like
virtually.
poking your head into their office or something
Yeah,
like, hey, how's it
yeah.
going?
They can lock the door if they need to. Um, but personally, I love kind of like optimizing, and like if I know that there's some issue coming up and I'm like, okay, I need this person and this person and this person to solve it, and I'll just try to get them all in a room together virtually, and you know 10 times out of 10 the issue gets solved very quickly, because we can so easily get together like that, um, even if somebody might be at a client site or at home, or maybe commuting at the time. We're all just so used to that pretty quick collaboration that I think I spoke to earlier around just what um, helped me adapt to working at iuvo in the first place. And I think everybody would say that they can really rely on their coworkers here, which um, again feel like should be a it doesn't feel like it should be a you know it feels like it should be assumed that you can do that, but it's really not the case in every work environment. We've done a really good job of getting really good people together, and I think that only enhances the culture. um, I think on that similar note, one thing that we've sort of observed as we've grown is the culture does shift and evolve over time a little bit, and I think that's healthy and good. Like you don't want it to drift really far, but it changing a little bit isn't a bad thing, and it's always going to be different as the size of the company changes. And I think it's just about, as long as it still aligns with the core values, that's the most important thing.
So, what would you say for a company that is fully remote are some of the tools that we've experienced working well and helping us succeed when it comes to collaboration?
Yeah, so I mean, we've experimented with a number of different things. In terms of specific technical tools, we find Slack to work very well for chat communication. I think that's where a majority of our like ad hoc communicating is happening. We also are a Teams organization primarily, so it's a lot of calls like this over Teams, usually video calls. I think that's another interesting kind of indicator of cultural health, I would say, is like how often people turn on their video on a call. Like um, uh, similarly, a lot of the clients that I work with that I think have the strongest culture, that's just sort of the expectation that everybody has their video on and nobody is sweating it. It's just status quo. But it shows that you like, it's a respect thing for me. I think, you're present in this call or meeting or whatever it is with this other person, and you're paying attention to them, and you're not, doing 17 other things at the same time. And I think that um, if you are giving off that perception in a remote environment, then it really starts to erode that culture a bit.
I have a couple to jump in on.
Yeah.
So I think, for collaborating and working remotely, I think there has to be a shared documentation of where things are at so people know where to look. And we have SharePoint, we've got some IT specific tools, IT glue and so forth, where everybody knows, okay, I can take over for this. Or for us, we have a ticketing system. Not everybody has. There's a lot of places have some kind of service portal of sorts, just to keep a status on things so people can come in and out. Oh, show me what you've done so far. Something that Matt has recently implemented is a part of Microsoft 365, which is Viva, where we establish big goals. People can see what's going on. So it's a way for people to see what's going on, to share information. We do have um, talking about open book, open door. We try to share all the information with everybody. So there's nothing really hidden other than HR sensitive things. So I think some of the tools we use there in that realm allow people to stay connected to what they need to do, and it's really easy to go back and forth.
Yeah, I think I definitely take some of that stuff for granted. But yeah, I think having the data that people need easily accessible in like a secure but highly functional way is definitely just important for, that's just sort of a good best practice for any digital business, because whether or not that is in a physical office, those issues can spread regardless of if you're remote or in a physical space.
And just and I'll just add, just we had two previous podcasts around AI. Is that AI is just making this better and better for people to collaborate and find information and so forth. So it's something that probably, if people are thinking about remote collaboration, those are things that'll enhance it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thinking about, a lot of what we've talked about is great, especially for like well-established employees, but how do you take someone brand new into the company and have them meld into this culture? Like, let's say the culture is great, like it is at iuvo. What is it that you do to help someone assimilate into that culture so that they feel psychologically safe? Um, to be a part of that group? Are there specific things that iuvo does that could be recommendations to someone that's trying to build this culture, especially when they're hiring new employees?
Yeah. I think I'm glad that you said that, because it was something I meant to bring up earlier. And so I think starting from the hiring process, I think you need to sort of set the right expectations. So um, one of the first things we talk to any candidate about in our hiring process is the core values that we mentioned, and sort of what the culture is like, and set that expectation as early as possible, so that um, when people start, it's not, they know what to expect. And also they they will likely need to have things reiterated. Particularly in a culture, if they're coming from a different culture, a lot of people have what I tend to refer to as workplace trauma, from a toxic culture or just like a really difficult job. And you might tell people everything that we've talked about, but they're not. they're not going to internalize it right away, and that's okay. And you just have to, everybody's going to embrace it at different amounts of time. And you just have to adjust to that and be consistent, and make sure that you're reiterating, expectations, what's okay, and make sure that they feel as comfortable as possible. um and again, it's going to take time. A few things that we do specifically to help with this is we always assign like an existing employee, in sort of a tangential department potentially, that just will meet with a new employee, just to build that relationship, to have an avenue for them to ask questions that they might not be comfortable asking their manager, that kind of thing. And that find helpful as sort of like a cultural mentor. And we do a number of different things in the onboarding process as well, to really try to get people exposed to as many different folks at the company as possible. So we have all new hires meet with all the different department heads, their obviously their manager and HR and that kind of thing. And then just as many other people throughout the company as we can, to just start building those relationships, because it's just such a core tenet to them embracing the culture and feeling comfortable doing so. Because at the end of the day, like, being yourself, particularly in a work environment, is a little bit vulnerable sometimes. So I think you really just have to be aware of that and give people the space and time that they need to open up and be themselves, and recognize that that's not going to be reflected poorly against them, or have some sort of repercussions that they might have experienced somewhere else.
No, I think those are great points, and I'll add to that as someone who's newer to iuvo. Um, with this kind of buddy system almost that you're referring to, I think what I found great is that as you're getting to know this cultural mentor, if you will, they get to know your likes, your interest, and then they help connect you with the other people in the company that they know have shared likes and interests. And, in our case, being fully remote, Slack, as you mentioned, is a channel that we use often for that. And we have Slack channels for these different interests. And so that cultural buddy is then able to say, I have the perfect Slack channels for you. Like, you got to go in here and talk with these people. And it just helps to have that human to human interaction in a very remote setting work well, in my opinion. We also do the lunch, the virtual lunch that everyone at the company is a part of when we have a new hire, and the new hire is sent lunch, or they get to choose which restaurant they want to order from. And so it's like lunch on us, and we have like icebreaker questions to help get things rolling, which I find really fun and engaging. And typically within the first month or two of a new hire, I feel like we do try to get people together physically as best we can, whoever's available, because at the end of the day, any opportunity we can get to find those opportunities just helps strengthen those connections even more. And in my case, it was a bowling event that we had like within weeks, I think, of being hired, and it was just such a fast way to kind of instantly connect with everyone, on top of the virtual lunches and the Slack connections that were already happening. And it just helped expedite something that I thought would have taken much, much longer for a completely remote company, which was interesting.
I think also with the buddy system allows people to model what it's like, to like, so if you're apprehensive about asking a question, or making yourself vulnerable to saying you don't know something, and that person, that buddy says, you watch them like, oh, it's okay for them, it's okay for a buddy. Matt mentioned maybe bringing some trauma from a previous job, and I've seen people, it does take a while for people to fully embrace it, or like, oh, your culture's real, I wasn't sure, and now I know that. And so I think it helps everyone start to, if you're all aligned, then everybody, you see the modeling, and it opens up that psychological safety that you're asking about, Jess.
Yeah. And I felt like, Matt, you were directly talking to me when you're talking about that, because I am an example of that, coming from education. Being afraid to take time off is very difficult. Trying to justify it often felt like, guilty until proven innocent when it came to the way that we were measured with metrics. And still, I'm adjusting to the reality of a healthy culture and a healthy work life balance, and working for people and reporting to people that want that for me, which is just a hard concept to wrap your head around, like you said, Matt. And having people that are patient with you through that is such a huge part of that adjustment, because I'm years in now and it's still an adjustment where I'm being reminded, like, Jess, yes, take the time off. You have to go to the doctor. It's okay. You're on vacation. Do not sign in. Do not check your email. And I think one of the things that has helped me at iuvo to make that adjustment is to see it practiced from the top down. And I think it's one thing when people say that to you, but don't practice it themselves. Because if the people you're reporting to, the higher ups in the company, say, yes, we have great culture, work life balance, but they don't practice that, it makes the employees that are reporting to them feel a lot more pressure to perform at the level that they are and to be reporting at the level that they are. And so I think that's another thing that iuvo does that I would recommend to other companies. If you are in a senior leadership role, to really do some self-reflection on, if you're saying you want a culture that is X, are you practicing that? Are you modeling that and demonstrating that to your employees? Because if you're not, I think it makes it a lot harder for your employees to live that culture that you want them to have.
Yeah, I think the real easy example of that being taking vacation. It's like it's one of those things where if your manager never takes vacation, they maybe as the manager you think people don't notice, but people definitely do notice. And so modeling, I think, is super important. And yeah, I mean, and uh, I wasn't necessarily speaking to you directly, Jess, but it's just so common amongst everybody in different degrees. It's really just everybody to some amount. And it's something that I often say in interviews when just I'll usually give an initial overview of the company, and often the feedback that I get from people is like, "Yeah, that sounds like almost too good to be true," and I'm usually like, like I hope to prove to you that it is, like, um, and or even we can use this or not in the actual edit, but what I actually usually say to people is that it's not bullshit. It's what I usually specifically say. um,
I'm fine with that.
the because it's not, and I think it's it's really easy to be a little salesy in an interview process, and you're working at this company, you want to hire somebody, you want to make it sound perfect and utopian, and like in any us being a consulting service industry, it's like we're the thing that we control is the people that work here, and to a certain extent who we work with, but you never really know how that's going to go. And I think when you have a really strong people foundation internally, it translates into really good service for customers. And if you have any sort of toxicity on either side, you immediately notice it, and it's one of those things that if you want to maintain that good culture, you just need to address it right away.
I know we're keep on the subject because, but when you really struck something with me is that, it's really true that it's really difficult to do a good job if you don't love your job, and you can't love your job if you're not taken care of and you have a good culture. So I run across this sometimes in retail where people are like, oh my gosh, they don't like their job. You could tell they're just burned out for whatever reason, right? And so you kind of when you run into somebody who's like, maybe it's the same exact position, but they are just jazzed and they want to help you, and it just makes such a difference. You can tell they love their job. They're probably being supported well. I would guess. They, whatever situation is in there. So I think it's yeah, it's if you don't have your basic needs met but from the company, it's really hard to do your best work. And that really reflects whether you're building a machine or serving people.
I was just gonna say that um, people's work life is just a part of their whole life, right? It's a decent amount of time a week, but it's not their whole life, right? And so assuming that it's not like the show Severance where uh, you know their work life and personal life are completely separate and don't impact each other in theory. They do, and I think trying to completely ignore people as human beings outside of what you're paying them to do is a bit of a miss. Like you're just gonna, it's just like trying to figure out what's in a black box. Like if you don't get to know people, if you don't treat them like people, then you're climbing an uphill battle for sure, and you don't necessarily know what's going on all the time.
No, definitely. And I think, Bryon, you brought up a good point in that, at the end of the day, it's good business. Like it only benefits your business. It only benefits your bottom line. When your employees are happy, they're going to be more productive. They're going to be more focused. If they're in client serving roles, like the clients are going to feel that impact. And so it goes beyond just like this fluffy hearts and unicorns. It really is just good business at the end of the day. And if you put in the work to really do it mindfully, you will benefit overall in the health of your business beyond just employees walking around being happy. And I think that's something that's maybe missed with some companies that want to say they have good culture or they have like more of a toxic positivity kind of attitude. If it's not genuine, you're not going to see the results that we're talking about. But there are true benefits to doing this when it comes to the bottom line of the business. And I think iuvo has gone above and beyond to do that and has seen the fruits of that, from a business standpoint in the growth that you've had. But also I think that there are policies in place even that just keep hammering down this point, such as, I had never heard of this before, but like being reviewed on your time off for the opposite, in the sense of like you haven't taken enough time off. Like we have a minimum time off standard, which was mind blowing to me. I've always seen it in the reverse, that your employer is going to be looking at your time off as like making sure you don't go over a certain amount. Whereas like the reverse is true here. The management is looking at their employees to making sure they took enough time within each quarter, even to say, like, we want to make sure you're balanced. We want to make sure that you're healthy and that you're creating that balance for yourself. And then in turn, when people have life events like you're talking about, Matt, because we're human, the support is just out of this world, where everybody is all hands on deck and you are absolutely allowed to step away and handle your business. Because in the reverse, if you're a company that's not flexible and doesn't rally around your people when they're in a time of need, and you're forcing that person to come to work and try to like truck through, they're not going to be giving the results that you're looking for. And then it's going to just kind of spoil the rest of the group and set the tone that you are supposed to power through even when you're really struggling. And overall, it impacts your business in a negative way too.
Yeah, I think that brings up a few things for me. I think one, just on the face of it, there's a lot of good data around people producing better work when they're not overworked, in various forms, in various 4-day work week kind of studies that have been done. Um, and it's a really simple analogy to the vacation thing. It's like people, if it's like preemptive care for your health. It's if you preemptively get people to take time off and they don't get to the point of burning out and then taking time off, it's like changing your oil before it's like smoking. There's longer term impacts of those things that I think people tend to ignore, because at the end of the day, it's like, oh, how much can I squeeze out of this stone? And and if you just look at people like almost consumable resource, then you're already so far off of this culture conversation, like, you know what I mean? But it's unfortunately super common, which I think is why it's always a little challenging to sort of get people to adapt to the culture that we've built here. But it's a good challenge, right? It's, at the end of the day, I think part of why I've been really interested in getting more involved in the culture and people side at iuvo, because I've had a bunch of different roles here over the years, is just that I think people are like the most interesting aspect of existing in the world, and so and they're complex and they require a lot of different ways of thinking, and it's not you're never gonna have a cookie cutter approach for everybody. You just have to sort of figure out ways to recognize patterns and like support people and listen and adapt, and that to me is just it's sort of a never ending and really interesting challenge. And so like it was maybe not sound natural, but it feels like a natural evolution from being a pretty technical person to, you know, solving technical problems are significantly easier than solving people problems, and even in my career of working with, you know, in customer support in various assets, or in various, what's the word I'm looking for?
Aspect.
Aspects. Thank you. In working in customer support in various aspects, uh, I've always been somebody that's pretty good at dealing with people when they're really upset. Just because at that point, if someone is upset about, something with a computer, it's probably not the computer that is producing the behavior that's happening, right? And so that's applicable to kind of any conflict with people. It's like you really have to address the person and not the specific situation. So it's all super interesting. um I feel like you had said something else too, in addition to the vacation and time off, that I thought was really interesting, but we roll back the tape.
Yeah, let me just roll it back. I'm trying to think. I was talking about our policies for that. No, I don't remember either. It's gone.
One other thing that I thought of it at a few points that just thought would be interesting to mention, around related to our interview process too. One thing that we did and started doing a little before I was hired, so we've been doing it for a long time now in the interview process, is we have people present to the company as their final interview on something that they're passionate about. Um, and for some people, that is a little daunting. We invite everybody to the company to this, and there's varying levels of comfort for that, but I think it really does help break the ice for people. And being in that hot seat, giving that presentation, you know, with a job hinging on it, is a lot of pressure. And I think getting through that process, with a attentive audience with interesting questions, which is usually the case, um, I think that is another useful step into people being like, okay, like I just did this thing that was a little nerve wracking for me and it went okay. And these people seem very nice. And, you're meeting a bunch of people for the first time. And I think it's another like layered piece of that kind of whole interview through onboarding process that I do think helps people transition into the culture that we have.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. That when I mean, I hear people that say, like after somebody gets through it and they get hired, then it's like a bonding, like everyone got through it. It's that whole thing, of like, well, what am I going to present on? And we give people a lot of flexibility on what they present on, just for the sake of this podcast. Jess presented on how having a podcast would be really great, and we should have a podcast, right? So, Jess was able to follow her passion and make this happen. So we're all very delighted that this process has been happening because it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Um, I was going to say too that one of the things about I think, Matt, your style and kind of the cultural, I think you excel at this, but is finding out about people beyond the job, finding out what's going on in their lives, what's interesting about them, so you can so when something comes up, you know how to handle it, and you say, oh well, they're doing pretty good considering what's going on in their personal life, right, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Let's cut them a little slack and so forth. So I think this company is full of very interesting people, and I think that makes it interesting as well.
Well, that actually reminded me of what Jess said that I wanted to respond to. And I'm sorry because I feel like that was transitioning into a question, but I didn't want to forget again. And it's that I think in a lot of organizations there are probably too many single points of failure amongst functions in the business and amongst the staff, and I think that often leads to people not being able to take time easily because of the impact that it'll have, and meaning like whatever they do just is going to stop or pile up while they're gone. And so it's like they're not really able to easily take a break. And so one thing that I think is really important that we do to address that is we make sure that we have good redundancy in terms of all of the functions within the organization so that people can truly take time away from work. And I think that's always an ongoing and very intentional way that we've built the business, because it's not always super straightforward, but it really makes a big difference. And I think the other piece of that we often have to unpack with people is just that I think some folks see uh, creating redundancy in a certain function as like a threat to their job. And so that's another one of those things that can sometimes come from trauma from another organization where it's like, oh, I don't want to train this person on this thing that I'm the only one that knows how to do it because then they're just going to replace me. Right. And that's, you know, that's that trust piece. You sort of need to have all the other things in place to make people comfortable training somebody else to do parts of their job so that they can, um, again, take time away, or if something, happens, God forbid, that unexpectedly take time away. And, sometimes you can't prepare for that stuff. And, you know, it, it just benefits so many things to have that redundancy. You're expanding other people's skill sets in the process. Usually, you're, teaching somebody something is always in my opinion, the best way to learn it really well. So like, it just has a lot of side benefits that also ultimately mean that people can step away from work without impact. So that was what I think another key thing related to the vacation thing that you mentioned, Jess.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important because from an outside perspective, you're right. It's not something I think about from my role as far as the how we're able to do that. But I think it's really important to point out in this conversation for, any leadership that may be watching or listening in, to know that that's how you can make that happen for your team. So we're coming up on time, and I want to give you guys an opportunity to make any final statements before I ask my last non-culture related question.
I feel
Speak
like
now or forever hold your
No,
peace.
no, I was leading up to that question with earlier, so I think that was the time to ask it.
yeah.
All right, perfect. So at the end of our episodes, Matt, we like to ask for you to share a fun fact about yourself that might surprise people.
It's a good question. I think maybe one that neither of you know. Um, it's sort of random, but the last 2 times that the Minnesota Twins won the World Series were the year that I was born and the year that my brothers were born.
That's really cool. I did not know that.
They may never win again because
Do you have a connection to Minnesota in some ways other than that?
I was born in Minnesota.
Oh,
So
okay. Yeah.
yeah. So the
I didn't know that either, actually.
yeah. So the first time that they'd won in a very long time was 1987 when I was born, and then my brothers 4 years later. So they were not born in Minnesota though, but it still worked.
Wow.
That's very cool.
Didn't it inspire your parents to have more kids? We need one more championship.
Yeah, they're not big enough baseball fans, I think.
All right. Thank you, Matt. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Edge of Excellence. The way we work may be changing, but as we heard today, culture and connection are what really make remote and hybrid teams thrive. If you'd like to learn more about how iuvo helps organizations build stronger teams and smarter technology strategies, you can visit us at iuvotech.com. You'll also find this episode along with all of our past and future conversations available there.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Matt, for being an awesome guest today. Until next time, keep building cultures that inspire excellence wherever your team may be.
Thank you for tuning in to the Edge of Excellence. We hope today's insights empower you to shape your future and rise to your full potential. Let's continue to grow, innovate, and lead, pushing the boundaries of excellence.